This week, Colorado's governor asked the legislature for $10 million to extend food assistance to the 10% of our state's population who receive nutritional assistance, with federal funding set to expire next week. And from ranching communities in Colorado, cattle producers are speaking out about their livelihoods being threatened, along with their rural communities, if the president follows through with his idea of bringing in beef from Argentina. And there are also topics of financial and safety issues, surveillance cameras up for discussion on this week's Colorado Inside Out. Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Dyer. Let me get right to introducing you to this week's Insider Panel. We start with Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward; Krista Kafer, columnist with the Denver Post; Tyrone Glover, civil rights and criminal defense attorney; and Ian Thomas Tafoya, community leader and a former candidate for mayor of Denver. Let's start in the state's capital city. Denver's money issues remain troubling as the city council takes steps to finalize a budget. Now, next week, the city council will hear public comment. This week, Mayor Johnston offered to return some services they originally cut, with $4 million in COVID relief money. But then word got out that Denver is out some $2 million because of rent the Denver Post has not been paying to the city. The Denver Post rents a building that the city owns. So there's that. And Patty, now the city auditor is saying there are many areas that we're going to start auditing.
Well, the city auditor does that every year. That's the auditor's job, but he's picked some really good ones for 2026. The 16th Street project, he's talking about homeless again, and we're going to be looking at these bonds. But we also see that Johnston won some points back this week, put more money into the eviction issue, people who are going to get evicted. Said we're going to come up with a way to have parking magistrates, even though there's no more money for it. Doty, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, is going to come up with a system. And maybe they can get the money from the Denver Post. My favorite story of this week, that beautiful building at the side of Civic Center, which was built for the JOA when we had two newspapers, named for the Post, which was the dominant paper in that JOA deal. Johnston should just get that ticker tape thing running again on the side, it's broken, and say, pay your bills, which is what he did say in public when it came out. Alden Global, big vulture capitalists, have not been paying the city of Denver for the lease for the building that the Post bought. That the Denver bought from the Post.
And the city council didn't even know of this, right?
No, city council found out this week.
Krista.
I can't speak to that last issue, but I will talk about the fact that this give and take is all part of the process. When you have an executive and then you have a legislature, in this case, it's the council, putting forth a budget, making cuts, putting forth a counter proposal, just gets that back and forth, which some things end up getting refunded. And I think as a taxpayer, that's ultimately a good thing. Ideas get tested, things get changed. One of the things that I appreciate is that initially he had said, we're not going to do the online appeal system for parking. And why that was important is that it made it easy when there were mistakes. The fact is we know there were mistakes. A third of all of those appealed cases they just ended up tossing out the ticket. And about half, there ended up being a reduction in the price for the ticket. So it does go to show that people make mistakes. People who give the tickets make mistakes. Sometimes there's extenuating circumstances. There needs to be a system where people can easily go forth and put forth an appeal. They were going to take that off the table, and now they're saying, you know what, we're going to put something different on the table, and ultimately it's not going to cost the city. Ultimately, it will come from higher rates and higher tickets, but people will still be able to make these appeals. And it will take it out of the hands of magistrates, out of the court, so that it is done in a way that is faster and doesn't burden the overall system.
My take on many of these cuts is we are asking for just much of our vulnerable populations to really bear the brunt of this financial and fiscal mismanagement. Since 2020, there's been 851 recommendations from the auditor, and I think 32% remain unimplemented. So it's one thing to come up with all of these cuts, it's another thing to actually do them. But the ones that they are doing are, I think, disproportionately harming our most vulnerable populations. The cut to the STAR mental health program of $1.5 million when we're at the same time weeks after layoffs, giving the police a 15% raise. We're really showing where our priorities are here with these cuts. When you're cutting mental health responses, giving police raises, you're really criminalizing poverty. And at the end of the day, I have some real equal protection concerns with that.
All right, and Ian.
Well, I think that there is something we have to get out on the table, that I think this is quite possibly the worst budget scenario we've seen since the Great Recession. And so there's a lot to deal with. And at the national level with tariffs, the impacts with federal grants that are not making their way to Colorado, this all compounds on our issues. And so I would agree that we are in a situation where there is this give and take. It seems like the mayor gave a little on elections, but he also took a couple digs at city council around Star, saying, well, you guys got a raise, maybe you guys can take a piece of that. At the end of the day, we are in a situation where I find myself talking to people, and my own kitchen table, is now the time to build 2 new stadiums? Is now the time to pay 50% in bonds over this entire, the doubling of these bonds that we're voting for to Wall Street, when public banking and some of these other solutions offer us? I think at the end of the day, the auditor's piece is critically important. Over the years, I've watched many audits, and I think the listening to the people whose job it is every single day to try to make the system work better is good. And we're going to be getting into some of the sales taxes this year as well. I mean, Caring for Denver being on this list. I have asked the mayor personally for a sales tax task force after his housing bond failed, or his housing sales tax failed, excuse me. We've reached this kind of capacity, I think, of communities, and we're not spending all of the money. So we need to dial those in the right way.
All right. We are in the middle of Pedestrian Safety Month and also Domestic Violence Month. And those are 2 areas that Colorado needs to work on now, Krista. It was really upsetting to see a reported 24% increase in domestic violent fatalities in our state, 88% in pedestrian deaths in Colorado.
Well, and the first one isn't something that a lot of us can do anything about. These were, in most of these cases, very violent men who killed their partners and killed their own children. If you know somebody who's in one of those situations, helping them to get out, to get away from those people, maybe to de-escalate those situations. But where I feel I can make a difference is the second statistic, is the 88% increase in pedestrian deaths, is how am I driving and how am I acting as a pedestrian? And then also being smart as city planners, getting this road construction finished so that you don't have frustrated drivers, but also that you don't have barriers to pedestrians and bicyclists, and everyone is able to use these thoroughfares in the safest way possible.
Yeah, and the construction is never ending, it feels like, right?
Well, you have like 2 seasons, really. It's like construction and winter.
Yeah. Okay, Tyrone.
And I see both of these as systematic failures. I think that with the domestic violence deaths, domestic violence it's complicated in that oftentimes there are issues with victims reporting. There are issues with victims staying in those situations even after several convictions. And one of the ways, I think, to sort of support victims and get around this is providing resources to families, resources to victims. And unfortunately, a lot of these programs are the very programs that are being cut and being gutted. We can even talk about access to weapons and guns like that. I think 100% of the children deaths were gun related. And there's also some pieces there. I think A.G. Weiser has talked about having a sort of, because at the end of the day, once there's a protective order, all the guns are removed from the households. But there is this sort of gap between the arrest and when that protection order enters, that they may still have access to the weapons. And so I can think of a number of ways that systematically we can deal with this. I can also think of a number of ways systematically we can deal with the pedestrian deaths. When you're looking at the streets, Federal Boulevard being one of them that account for these deaths, it's sort of systematic, I feel like, of people getting pushed further away from the city centers because of just cost of living, right? And now the people who need to take public transportation, who need to walk to work, are now walking down streets without sidewalks. They're trying to bike where there's not bike lanes, where there's construction. And so I think really bringing our sort of outer lying areas up to code, up to snuff, so that those folks who are sort of, I think, being pushed out can also be safe as pedestrians is also paramount.
Yeah, just last weekend, 3 pedestrians were killed last weekend. Ian.
Well, my heart goes out, of course, domestic violence, awful. Everything you were saying about where does the intersection with guns come into this conversation, I think is super important. On the pedestrian side and the investments around bikes, I mean, personally, I was hit by a car when I was 7 years old. The only thing that saved my life was a helmet. And I just want to point out, like, I-25 and Broadway, when I was running for mayor, this one came up. That one intersection that it cost, which we now know is serving this new stadium, and we weren't talking about then, is enough to do the entire bicycle network for the entire city and county of Denver, right? Similarly, with these bond packages that are being put forward that are heavy on roads and say they are about pedestrians, is a much smaller piece of it. And instead, the pedestrian advocates are going to the ballot and asking people to fund sidewalk fees, for example. And so those monies are getting grabbed somewhere, but these infrastructure bonds and capital improvement programs qualify exactly for these programs. And so I think that CDOT and DOTI both are misguided in the pieces of the pie that they're cutting for these, because at the end of the day, people's lives matter a lot, and you can't tax somebody who's dead, and that's you can't toll a road, you can't get them to pay it, and I think they're making mistakes on where they're investing. I mean, 270 is being discussed, being widened. They already spent $2 billion on I-70, billions of dollars on these projects. Who's making the money while all these rates for pedestrians are going up?
Yeah, and Patty.
I'm going to bring it back to domestic violence. I think a lot of people don't realize how cutting edge Denver was 3 decades ago on dealing with domestic violence. New policies that if there was a domestic violence call, someone had to go to jail. Someone had to be taken away to defuse the situation. That was groundbreaking when Denver started doing it. Domestic violence courts. People were really paying attention. The identification of the battered women syndrome, and also in some cases battered men, where you don't see how you can leave. It's like the Stockholm syndrome. You don't see how you can leave and still take care of your children and pay your bills. And now we've got new pressures with health issues, with food issues that are adding to those tensions. So we have to remember that we were on the cutting edge of dealing with this issue, and we can get back there again. And you've got 8 dead kids who show just how much we need to pay attention.
And that was the highest number ever, right, for children falling victim to domestic violence.
Right.
It's awful. Okay. Now let's talk about the push for more cameras around us to assist law enforcement. Aurora City Council has signed off on the use of facial recognition technology to help solve some cases. Arvada and Meade are already doing this, and despite urges before the City Council this week in Denver, Denver is upping up its contract with Flock Safety. Tyrone, where would you like to start?
I just think that this is a huge mistake. I mean, we have seen the data, and these facial recognition, the technology is not there yet. And I think, bias that are within these machines is very much present. The statistic from MIT, right, and I think that it has not been disproven, is that there is a 34.7% error rate for identification of black women versus a 0.8% error rate for white men. I think that this is significant, as one of the folks who actually authored the complaint for the Gilliam family, which, if you remember, back in August of 2020, a group of girls with their aunts and mother going to like a girls getting their nails done outing, all held at gunpoint, face down on the hot pavement because they misidentified them, and it was actually a license plate for a motorcycle when all of them were in a rather large SUV. So the technology is not there, and to roll out a facial recognition technology that our AG has already found has systematic racial bias in it, our own state AG finds this, is just, I think, not the right path. But interestingly, I think it was ICE who searched it 1,400 times. I mean, they are the primary user of this. So I think we'll probably talk about it a little bit later in the program. But this does seem to be consistent with a trend of bowing to ICE and the administration as well.
All right, Ian.
So I've had a conversation with the mayor about this and other Latino leaders who were very concerned about what kind of protections were going to be available for this data. And I think we all sit here and say, do we have people on staff who are going to be sure and have oversight to make sure that this database never gets cracked or nobody ever gets into it? I think there's all that concern in the background. I did talk to some council members on both sides of the issue, feeling like the fulfilling of this $500,000 grant, no cost extension. And I think, they're kind of split on whether or not he's using the powers that he has versus coming back with a better contract in the long run. I will say that hundreds of people packed a room to have this conversation. I've been getting texts since COVID. There was a ballot issue that was circulating around banning facial recognition, and it was only because of COVID and the inability to petition successfully that one disappeared. So I feel like this is just the beginning. And when you think about the collusion of surveillance state as a millennial since the Patriot Act, I think there are a lot of people who don't want to see it.
You mentioned the meeting Wednesday night, but even before the city council Monday night,
Yes.
a lot of people were standing up and saying, please do not go forward with Flock.
Well, and the meeting had already been set up for Wednesday because it was a neighborhood meeting. And it was amazing that all of a sudden the announcement of the extension came right before that meeting, which definitely irritated many of the people who'd organized it. The concern on that is, yes, Johnston says that we will not release this. The information will not go to ICE. But I think all of us are feeling not too secure in what we're going to be able to keep from the federal government right now. I mean, they certainly are, the federal government is certainly making moves like they will take anything they can get. The other reminder that we all have is cameras are everywhere. Even if the government doesn't have access, the media does, and all you need to do is look at the giant span who got into an altercation with people leaving the No Kings rally, and it was a mess, and it was all over, and wound up with one person being arrested for the wrong action, and that's been changed now. But cameras are everywhere. Behave yourselves.
Yeah.
Well, I think two things. If you're going to build something that's controversial, don't name it Flock. Just think that could be problematic. Secondly, there is an inherent tension between privacy and safety, and I'm very empathetic to the privacy concerns, especially given the flaws that you pointed out in the technology, the fact that it's still evolving, it still needs some improvements. But there's also the safety side of it. And they have arrested criminals, and they have gotten people's stolen cars returned to them. So it is an important part of law enforcement. We're talking 100 cameras in a pretty good-sized city, so it's not that there's a camera on every street corner. These are placed pretty strategically. So even though I'm aware that there are some problems, I also think that there's some benefits. And as somebody who's been a victim of crime, I tend to err on the side of giving the police those tools to be able to arrest those criminals and return stolen property. And I do hope that the governor's or the mayor's word and the systems they're putting forth together, the contract, that they will be able to keep this information in-house and that it doesn't go inappropriately to ICE.
Okay. All right. Speaking of data sharing, Governor Polis appears still willing to comply with a federal immigration subpoena and turn in the names of around 10 Colorado companies that have employees on staff who sponsor unaccompanied migrant children. They want to give that information. The ICE wants that information. Governor Polis looks like he's going to go forward with that, even though a Denver judge keeps reminding him that would be against Colorado law, Ian.
This is one that I'm looking forward to Tyrone talking about. We talked about it in the back end, not being a lawyer myself. What I can tell you is I'm seeing this play out in the community I organize with on a regular basis, and it is very disappointing. I can tell you at the Hispanic Heritage Month event at the governor's mansion, a letter was hand-delivered to the governor criticizing him for these choices that he's making to negotiate information to be exchanged. The cost, of course, to taxpayers at $100,000, violating a law on the same day that he signed it. And I think just generally, let's just take a step back here. These are still masked individuals who are coming in and grabbing people. And I understand that there's this tension that is escalating it to a boiling point, and all I can help but feel like that's part of the plan. And the part of the plan is for these people to push the community to begin to protest in a way that takes it beyond peaceful protest so that more can be clamped down on. And this is what it looks like in my community. What's happening with these individuals who are showing up and getting grabbed at court is the part that is so devastating. Because in an effort to get up their numbers, they're restricting people, saying that they're illegally here and not following the rules, but they're showing up for court. So if you're showing up for court, you're doing the right thing. This comes up in domestic violence cases. This comes up in everything else. And so the solutions here, I think, I can tell you that in my own family, I have my own Trump uncles. I got my own people in my family of all sides. They are even saying, like, this is going too far.
Okay. Patty.
There is one part of this this order that is tricky just because it does involve children and the question of unaccompanied children. But the larger picture is so worrisome, and it's not just what's happening in Denver. Obviously, you look at New York, where all of a sudden there was the ICE raid on vendors. You could see something like that happening in Denver, too. We don't have the National Guard marching around yet, but you could see something like that happen. But the fact that people are not secure just going about their daily lives when they're citizens, the number of citizens who've been snatched is really frightening, and it's only getting worse.
Mm-hmm. And Krista, your thoughts on this?
I'm a little bit sympathetic to Polis, our governor, in that I think two things. That there's the issue of unaccompanied children, and perhaps there needs to be some more scrutiny there, and that there may be something appropriate about putting forth this information. I also think he wants to keep the eyes of the administration off of Colorado. And the minute you run afoul of the administration, you invite some sort of vindictive action, whether it is the withholding of grants or perhaps the sending of troops into our city under the pretext of safety, even though it's a pretty safe city, but they're here really just to facilitate ICE. I'm sympathetic to Polis wanting to prevent that from happening. I also think that the court decision was written in such a way that it provides a little bit of a loophole. So it said, no, the Department of Labor cannot provide this information. Other departments might be able to, or they might not be able to, so there is a little bit of wiggle room. Perhaps the judge could have written it in a way that was a bit more black and white. As long as there's a little bit of wiggle room, that means that the governor has been willing to spend money on lawyers to be able to exploit that loophole. Unfortunately, that money is coming out of public coffers. $100,000 is a lot of money. They could go to other better things. But I do think that the governor is stuck between kind of a rock and a hard place and is trying to figure out the right way to go.
And as you mentioned, it involves children and the fear that these children could be trafficked, or that's the concern.
Yeah, and the concern around child trafficking, I think, is real, but it's not a real issue in this case, the one that Judge Jones has ruled on. There's no evidence of child trafficking, no verification of a criminal probe, and now no state welfare check. It was really just, I think, pretext to try to sort of get this subpoena through, which Judge Jones, I think, summarily struck down. Now, under a different factual scenario, would he rule differently? Potentially, but this is the factual scenario we're stuck with. This is kind of a states' right issue, and now we have a Republican administration sort of trying to force a Democratic governor to turn over these documents in response to these subpoenas. And really, it is, I think, just also a due process violation, because these are not real criminal warrants that are part of criminal investigations or criminal subpoenas, right? We're not talking about that type of compliance here. But I think to Krista's point, we are in just really unprecedented times, and despite what our federal precedent says, despite what our laws say, despite what we're supposed to do and what is due process and equal protection, there still are some pain points that I think our leaders and at the state and local level have to be cognizant of.
And what really galls me, honestly, is that for the longest time, Republicans were champions of the 10th Amendment, of states having prerogatives, of states being able to manage most of what goes on within their borders. And now we have a president, a Republican, at least in name, that is saying, I don't think he's actually read the Constitution, but I don't think he's aware also of the 10th Amendment or the fact that states do have prerogatives, and he wants to, from the White House, cause states to do things, and if they don't do what he wants, does something vindictive to try to force them. That's not a Republican value. That's not an American value.
Okay. All right, now let's go and talk with everyone about some of the highs and the lows that we found this week. I will start on a low note so we can end on a good note this week. Patty, let's start with you.
Well, I was watching the east wing of the White House being demolished yesterday morning, and I wasn't sure anything could be lower. And then all of a sudden, the news came of the pride of Park Hill, Chauncey Billups, being arrested for allegedly being involved in a high-stake poker scam. We don't know what's really happening there, but it's really hard on the start of the NBA home game tomorrow to have this hometown hero be brought down.
Yeah, I agree.
Beer is being held hostage even as we speak. There is a lot of beer being held behind closed doors that have been locked that cannot be accessed. And that's a tragedy. So the Hispanic Restaurant Association paid a local brewery, Raíces, to brew up some beer that they were going to use as a fundraiser. Well, the brewery, I don't know, they must have had some kind of go wrong because they didn't pay their taxes. They've now been shut down by the city. The problem is that the restaurateur's beer is still in the brewery, and the city is claiming that they will not allow access to that beer. Beer does not have a forever shelf life. That stuff's got to get bottled. If it's left there too long, it's going to go bad. That's a lot of beer. It's a lot of money. It's a tragedy. It needs to be stopped.
Okay. Tyrone.
My low is I heard that the Kid Watch at the rec centers, Carla Madison and Central Park, is now going away by the end of the year. I remember when Carla Madison opened up, I was living in Congress Park, just kind of right across the street. I remember taking my kids there. And the fact that they had, a kid watch, which is like a kind of a daycare so the parents can come and work out and be healthy. Oftentimes a benefit that you see at, I guess we'll call them higher end sort of athletic clubs and things like that. The fact that a rec center was offering that to members of the community, so parents and kids from the community could be healthy and engage in that. And the fact that it's going away is just a real bummer.
It is. All right, and Ian.
I continue to be completely shocked that Arizona Congress member Adelita Grijalva still hasn't been sworn in despite winning over a month ago. And I think this is another example of this dangerous game that's being played about democracy when a duly elected person can't be sworn in to take their votes. And I think it's important to note that they're talking about how she will be the last vote around the Epstein files to release them.
Mm-hmm. All right, something good, Patty, please.
An obscure fun fact, the first female prime minister of Japan was an intern in Pat Schroeder's office back in 1988. She saw Pat Schroeder talk about why she wasn't running for president. She called her, contacted her, wanted to support her, and Pat Schroeder offered her an internship.
And now she's in charge of Japan.
And now she's in charge.
That is a pretty cool story. All right.
I don't think there's any beating that, but I want to give a hats off to the Adelante Foundation. I got to go to Honduras for a week and meet women who are recipients of microloans that enable them to open small businesses all over the country and in particular rural areas. And I just love these enterprising women, and I love Adelante for helping facilitate entrepreneurism and community and growth and well-being.
Good. I love that you mentioned that. Tyrone?
Yeah, I want to shout out, Colorado's voting system. We were talking around the table about our different sort of voting propensities, and I was looking at my ballot before even coming in here, and I just think it's so well done. The mail-in, being able to drop off your mail-in if you kind of miss that cutoff, and being able to just show up to the polls even and vote. I just think that it's regardless of where you come out on the various issues we're all voting on, it's a system that is really solid, I found.
Yeah, the accessibility is very good.
Very accessible.
All right, Ian.
We talked about this one before. I was lucky enough to be at the Bronco game for the comeback, stayed all the way to the end. Awesome stadium, hadn't been there since they put in the new TV. I think it's a good stadium. I don't know why we're building another one.
Okay. All right, and my high, well, I have a couple. First, Krista, I don't know if you can see these little pumpkins, I guess they're pumpkins, that she brought in from her garden for all of us. So Ian has his out. We all have them out. Anyhow, thank you. Also, my high is also that I'm headed to a family wedding where my niece, who is one of my flower girls, is getting married. 25 years ago, she was my flower girl. And I'm very grateful to have the great Alton Dillard sitting in for me next week. So thank you in advance, Alton. And thanks to the insiders who are here this week. For those of you who are watching or listening from home, we appreciate that as well. I guess I'm Kyle Dyer, and I'll see you in 2 weeks after Election Day. So go vote.
PBS 12 believes in the power of original, local programming. Help us bring more shows, like the one you just watched, by donating at pbs12.org/program support today.